This is Waga and welcome to the channel. As always, like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you can be informed when new videos are made. We are going to continue making our dating app, and what we're going to do today is we are going to start working on BLoC. I'm going to talk about a bit about BLoC, and we are going to set up the authentication block, and that's what we're going to do today. Last time, as usual, we looked at what did we do last time? Yeah, last time we looked at we set up a few of the the folders on how our app should look, how the folder structure. We set up the folder structure and we connected it to Firebase. So on your right, I'm looking at the finished product, but our current app in its current state is this. But this is the finished product, which can serve as reference as I'm building, because it'll take a few videos before we start seeing the UI stuff, and I thought it best that it would be good to see where we're going to eventually end up on the right. So first things first is we are going to install several of the packages required to work with BLoC. And the first one, we're going to use Flutter Bloc. And Flutter Bloc is a sort of a simplification of the BLoC pattern. It's pretty good. It's really good, and you should consider it if you want to work with BLoC. It bundles a lot of things together and saves you a lot of hassle. So the first thing we would do is first off, if you check Flutter _ Bloc like so, you will find that in the past few days they have upgraded to Flutter Bloc 4.0. Like I said, we're going to use Flutter 3.20, which is what this is built with. I think there are a few breaking changes. I'm not going through the changelog and what they're doing. I'm guessing they're using a better provider and stuff, and yeah, we're not going to use this. We're going to use 3.20, which was a stable version when I was building this, but in the last few days, I think the last 4 days, this has come to the fore. But at the end of it, I will try and upgrade it to the latest stable BLoC. When I'm done with all this, I will look at the documentation again and try and set it up to use the latest BLoC. So we can look forward to when we are done everything else. We can upgrade the packages. But right now, I guess the core of BLoC, the core things, the core ideas are still the same, right? So we could just use 3.2. So for starters, let's go and use get Flutter Bloc. We're going to change the numbers, of course. So we come here and we go to pubspec to YAML. Remember, this file is indentation sensitive, so we would come here and say 3 and put a 2 there, and that is, why is it okay? That's weird. I was getting a red. That usually shows when there's an error. I don't think we've made an error right now. Next, we are going to put in place meta. Meta allows us to use annotations like override, and we'll do a lot of that, particularly when we are working with blocks. So we could come back here and say meta. Don't think meta has been updated. It's been the same for a while. So we could come to installing and we get BLoC like so, and we copy this and we come back here and we put it there. And remember, indentation sensitive, so make sure that lines up. And after that, we have Equitable. And what Equitable does is that it compares. Flutter has referential equality, and for you to compare two objects, there would need to be the same instance, right? So it will save us a lot of boilerplate code. It's usually recommended for when you're working with BLoC. Like, for example, if you look at this, you find that for you to compare the person, you have to put all this code, right? So that you can compare two instances of objects, different objects. And yeah, so you'd have to put all this together, and it saves us it just allows us to use two equals to compare objects, and it's very useful. So for that, we would just come to installing, and I'll explain more as we're using it, and give you instances of how that is done and what we could do. Oh god, why is this interfering? So let's just copy Equitable like so. Copy and come down here, and we put Equitable. So we have set up Equitable. The next thing we need is, I think, is that all? Let me just check my notes. We need RxDart, because we are going to be working with streams. We're going to be using RxDart, but primarily on the login and sign up screens, right? So that we can give a few options where somebody is typing their name on the form and things like that. So we're going to use RxDart, and for that we would come here and say RxDart, so we can work with streams rather, not screams. We're not working with screams. I think I also think that this works with RxDart 0.23, if I'm not wrong. Flutter Bloc works best with RxDart 0.23, but let's just install this. We can downgrade it. We won't be building that today, probably in the next video. So RxDart, tentatively, I'll look at whether it's 0.2, 0.23. So those are the things we need right now. I will be importing more as we go along, like the search function and things like that. So yeah, so this is what we need right now. So let us we hit pub.get, and we give it a few seconds, and it should get the packages we need. RxDart, oh yeah, you see, because Flutter Bloc 3.0 depends on Bloc 3.00, which depends on RxDart 0.23, Flutter Bloc requires RxDart 0.23, right? I was right. We need to downgrade this to 0.23. Okay, fine. Maybe if you upgrade to 4.0, you can use 0.24. I don't know. But currently, you need to downgrade that to 0.23. But we're going to do it, and hopefully everything should go swimmingly like so. So there, we have gotten the various files that we'll use right now. And now it's time to look at BLoC more in depth. There are a few terminology we will come across, and I just wanted to run through them. Of course, I'll explain them as we are typing them in, but I just wanted us to look at them, and that's what we're going to do next. Before we continue, if, for example, you're having challenges, particularly with the Firebase side of things, and you're getting errors, one thing you could do, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, you could just run Flutter clean. This will delete the build folder, and it can allow you to rebuild, and you might get rid of some of the errors. You could, of course, let's hit. So if you hit Flutter clean, it'll get rid of the build folder, or you could just delete it outright. That's another option. But Flutter build is, perhaps you could say, more elegant, the more elegant solution. Yeah, so yeah, like so, and you see the Flutter build is gone. Yeah, so sometimes you have issues with particularly the Firebase side of things, and that's one important command that you should remember. Okay, back to our app, and one thing I wanted us to go over was a sort of high-level explanation of what BLoC is. BLoC, of course, stands for business. Is it business logic component? Why has it all of a sudden just escaped my mind? BLoC stands for business logic component. Yes, I was wondering what the O is for. Okay, the O is not capped, so it's business logic component. This is the basic picture: UI, the block, and the data. So it has states and events, like so. So there are a few words, a few terminology you should go through and know what they mean, and we will refer to this as I explain. So an event is basically the input to the block. So you see here, let's make this smaller so that we can see everything, that everything is on the same page. These are some of the things that you might not have come across, maybe if particularly if you're really new to that, but if you've been building a bit, you've come across streams, I'm sure, and yield and the BLoC delegate, if you've worked with BLoC. So basically what an event is, an event is something that comes from the UI, maybe the app starting, somebody pressing a button, and it comes to the BLoC, and the BLoC normally the output of the BLoC is the state, which causes the UI to change. Maybe the state changes and it causes the UI to rebuild. And a BLoC takes in a stream and it gives out an outgoing state. As you can see, it takes in a stream and it gives out an outgoing state. Always when you're working with BLoC, it should extend the base BLoC class, and it usually maps an event. How it does this is by mapping the event to the state. You give it an event, like here from the UI, and it returns a state. And when you're adding a method to a BLoC, I believe it's usually you add it to the BLoC. You just chain in something like add and then the name of the event and stuff like that. You'll see it more when we start building. And yeah. Now what else would I want to talk about? A transition is basically going from a transition is a change from a certain state to another state. So for example, you could take the current state. A transition usually takes the current state, an event, and then yields the next state. A stream, of course, is just a sequence of data, and you must have seen this if you've been working with Flutter for a while. And yield basically deals with generator functions. So in a stream, instead of a return, you get a yield, because whatever you get keeps coming. So you normally, instead of having return like a function, a stream usually has a yield. A yield star, this is pronounced yield star, is usually it usually delegates to another generator function for it to do something. You will see it more clearly when we are in the next few videos of how yield star is used. So basically just it recursively calls another generator function. And what else? A BLoC delegate usually is where we normally put all the it oversees all the blocks, like all the transitions, and you can use it to log events. Particularly, it's good like when you run, like when an event comes to fruition, you can use the BLoC delegate to log events and transitions and even errors. So it's good for error handling, watching what transitions change, and yeah, looking at events. So it's good for documentation of how your app is, what is happening in your app. So usually you put that in the BLoC delegate, and you need to create a singleton with a supervisor that tells the blocks about the existence of a BLoC delegate. Usually you put this in the main.dat. We will get to that in the next few videos. So I just thought that this few words that maybe you may have not run into, or you may have run into, it would be nice to at least get a cursory glance and cursory introduction into them, so that you can know a bit about them, so that you can, when you encounter them, they won't fluster you as much, or you can come back to this and refer to it. So those are the various things that you deal with BLoC, and this image is a good example where we have the events that come from the UI, and it yields states that generate the rebuilding of the UI. So basically that's BLoC. The rest is details. Let's continue with BLoC. And first things first, I will admit that compared to provider, BLoC uses a lot more boilerplate code. And thankfully, there are ways around this. There are plugins that can generate this code for you on the fly and pretty quickly. The plugin in question, preferences, there are actually several plugins, but I will show you one that I and the BLoC package recommend. Yeah, take that for what you will. And the plugin in question is, give it a second, it's just loading. Let's just type BLoC, and how come I'm not finding it? BLoC, like so. Okay, let's just go to my install. Here it is. It's called BLoC code generator. So what you could do is get BLoC code generator, and it will save you a bit of trouble with the code generation. Not save you a bit of trouble, it will save you a bit of time. And yeah, there are several with different names, but make sure you get this one in particular, because for some reason that I can't seem to find plugins. There are several others with different names, but make sure you get the BLoC code generator. It's the correct one, and it's the one you can use. I'll show you exactly how we do it, how we generate code here. And first things first is we are going to generate code for, we're going to create a block for the authentication rather, not authorization, authentication, sorry. I'm thinking web and I'm on mobile right now. We're going to create a block for authentication, right? And how we would do that is, first we would come here to BLoC, and we would create a new package. Let's call it block.authentication, like this. Block.authentication, like so. And then we're going to use the magic of new block generator. We'll come down after you've installed the block and come to block generator and get a new block, and we could call it, we of course want to use Equitable, and we could call it authentication, and that will give us 3 files: the event, the state, the block, and the barrel file, which is useful for exporting like the various blocks. So if we hit OK, we should get everything, right? And I will explain the code. So if you come to the file here, and I don't like the way they do it like this, they should just put it, you'd have to put another file so that you can see it better, like it in its own package, authentication. So you would get authentication block.dat, like so. This is the class authentication block, and it gives you all this code, right? Here you just add the logic and the authentication event, like so, and it has an abstract class. Yeah, I'll explain more on that. The authentication state, and yeah, so you basically get all this from the plugin. It saves you a bit of time, and I will now go through explaining the state, the event, and then the final is just exportation. We just export it using the barrel, from the barrel. Export this tree, make it easier so that you can use it around your app. So this is basically what the plugin gives us, and I'll go into what the code is in a bit with authentication state. And the authentication state is basically going to be the state that we're going to use to decide what UI we're going to show. There is going to be one called uninitialized, another one authenticated, and we could say authenticated but not set, and of course unauthenticated. And depending on that, that is what we're going to use as a basis on deciding what to draw on our UI. And after that, we're going to have the events. These are all the events that come from the UI. For example, when I've started one of the events that we're going to have, will notify the block that it needs to check if the user is authenticated. Logged in will notify the block if that the user has successfully logged into Firebase, and logged out will tell the block that the user has successfully logged out, right? And of course, BLoC is going to be the brains, where it's going to take, you see here, map event. It takes an event and returns a state, and then based on that state is what the UI is going to be rebuilt or built into. So basically this is that. I wanted to actually just go out and build it all, but I realized that we are time-wise, we are hitting the 20th mark, and if we do everything, we'll probably be looking at about an hour of work, and I felt that that would be making the video a bit long, so I'm going to split these videos. I'm going to leave this here, and of course the final, before I forget, the final, this is just for exporting. I think I've said that before, but yeah, this is called the battle files, just for exporting, nothing much. So yeah, basically that is more or less it. And in the next video we will to use the auth block, we're going to have to create the model and the repositories. The repositories will abstract all the methods that interact with Firebase. So we need to have a user repository and a user model, and we will do that in the next video. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and remember, hit the notification bell so that you can be told when the next video is available to you. Have a good day, or good evening, or good afternoon, or good night. Thank you.